This episode of Friends of Flo is brought to you by NCLEX Mastery. If you're a nursing student and you're about to take your NCLEX, you need to go to the App Store right now and download NCLEX Mastery.
Welcome back, folks. It's Friends of Flo. I'm Tess Judge-Ellis.
I'm Andrew Witters.
I'm Rebecca Porter.
And we actually have a friend of Flo here with us today. It's Dr. Sandra Daack-Hirsch. And so we have a really exciting time planned today where our goal is to really talk about PhD education for nurses. And Dr. Sandra Daack-Hirsch is the director of the PhD program at the University of Iowa College of Nursing. So do we have anything else to clear up? I mean, before we got on, we talked a little bit about lice.
What have you? Oh, yeah.
Because Dougie C has lice in the family. And so, so we've been talking about that universal problem, especially now that school's starting, right? And so how much time you spend at combing your kids' hair out. And
My dog had fleas. Is that the same?
I don't know. Your furry friend had fleas.
Yeah.
Andrew, any comments on lice or what's been going on in your life?
We've not incurred lice events at my house yet. And my dog has had fleas. So, and school did start today. So that covers the whole 3-subject gamut right there.
That's right. I was walking and when I was driving over here, I saw the little kidlets being walked to school by their parents.
Do you remember when your kids started?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, definitely.
And Sandy, when your kids started?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What was it like?
I can tell you, my oldest, the day that her first day of school, I can tell you what she was wearing. I can tell you that she and I sat on the back porch and watched a flock of yellowbirds, goldfinch, in these flowers, and sat and talked about what the birds were eating. And then I walked her to school, and I cried.
And did she ever have lice?
Oh, God, she had lice. I was telling you guys. I was home alone with her and her brother and saw that she had lice, and I just freaked out, called my husband at work, said, "You've got to come home. I can't do this by myself." And we had to shampoo, and she has really thick, long hair, and we had to shampoo and comb her out like 4 or 5 times, and then her brother find all the stuffed animals, get all the bedding off and wash it and bag up everything. It was like a 2-day ordeal, and you just feel
totally
so dirty.
I think you said the only other worst thing is when you get called and said
your kid bit somebody.
Your kid bit somebody.
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah. The 2 worst childhood faux pas.
Right. So we're talking about education and back for education and talking about the PhD. So Sandy, talk a little bit about your background in nursing how you came then to this current position.
Okay. So Tess, you know my story well. I didn't start out in life to be a nurse. I actually was really interested in genetics and started as a biology major. I had really no idea that nurses could go to college. Most of the nurses that I knew worked at a hospital and had gone to a hospital-based program. They're called diploma programs, and I don't know if you guys have talked about those, but they were 3-year programs that were affiliated with hospitals. They trained the nurses who would work eventually at their hospital or their system of hospitals for the most part.
Well, my mom went to a diploma school.
Great programs. They're really very good programs. Solid nurses came out of
totally
the diploma.
Solid. And then, then my mom decided to get her bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
Actually, she's like, why did I go to college and not get a degree?
Right.
And then she also recognized that you're basically staffing the units on evenings and nights after a certain amount of time.
Right. So it's very much based in the traditional way that nurses were educated, right in the hospital that they worked. And so many of those nurses then weren't paid. They were apprenticed. And so finding a job that actually paid you was typically outside of the hospital system because the hospital used the nurses that they were educating to care for the patients. Probably mid-1980s, the diploma programs were phased out. Is that right?
Yeah, because 1965 was the American nurses who made the big, all nurses should have a bachelor's degree. That was in 1965, but I don't know what entity actually said that.
I didn't realize it was as early as 65.
It was 1965 that statement was made. And actually, the only state in the union is North Dakota that requires their nurses to have bachelor's degrees.
Yeah, I saw that in the IOM report on the future of nursing.
Right.
North Dakota. I chose a nursing school. I wanted to go to university. I refused to go to a hospital program. And the two competitors for nursing in Calgary at that time was Foothills Hospital and the University of Calgary. And I was called down in jobs because you were one of those degree nurses that didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Right. We've gone through a lot of changes now.
But back to Sandy. Back to Sandy.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Shiny objects. Shiny
right.
objects turning.
so I loved genetics. So this is 1981 when I graduated from high school, and we didn't really have, advanced placement science or honors courses in high school at the time, but anything genetics I would do extra work in. And so I'm first generation college, and I didn't really have, a role model of, find a college and what are you looking for in a college. But because I was such a nerdy science kid, I joined this, it was like a group of high school students, and we took field trips around the state of Iowa where, at the different colleges and universities. And the University of Iowa had, as we know, life sciences and biological sciences and healthcare discipline were really very well known for those things. So as a high school student, I experienced that and thought, okay, that's where I'll go to college. I came here as a biology major, like I said, interested in genetics and genetic counseling. So after my freshman year of college, I started looking into the genetic counseling program, and they said, that's a master's degree through the College of Nursing. And I thought, what? What does nursing
Was it
and
through the
genetics?
College of Nursing?
Yes,
okay, cool.
It was.
Wow.
When did it get taken away?
Oh, that's a sad thing. We'll get to that. So I thought, like I said, I didn't even know that nurses could go to college, and I so quickly changed majors because I wanted to do this genetics thing. So
you changed to nursing.
I changed to nursing after my sophomore year of college. Okay. Finished my nursing degree, got into pediatrics because that's where genetics was really happening at the time, was pediatrics and OB. 3.5 years on the floor, and then right into the genetics clinic to coordinate the care for children and families who have neuromuscular disorders or muscular dystrophy. And I was, it just struck me full face that, wow, genetics and nursing are just the perfect union of what I wanted to do, because you were offering genetic counseling as a portion or a piece of the care that we were giving patients, but most of my time was spent care coordinating, facilitating these children's education and their physical mobility issues in the school setting, helping families during the death and dying process.
Experience. This was their lived experience of illness with a genetic background.
Exactly.
Nursing care.
It really was, and I didn't understand that when I was getting my degree. I thought it was just a means to an end, right? From there, I went into a master's in the genetic program at the College of Nursing at the University of Iowa.
What year was that, Sandy?
That was 97 was when I finished my master's degree. And then I was working what I was doing, what I was studying. So it was just phenomenal. I got involved in a research lab where we were studying the genetics and environmental factors of cleft lip and palate.
So what kind of lab was it?
It was a molecular genetics lab.
So what was that like?
It was fascinating to be in, in an environment that was interdisciplinary and things were happening quickly. We were like a internationally known research facility for the studying cleft lip and palate.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really interested in this because I think nurses think that they have to get right into intensive care or critical care or
ER.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And forget that you have a science background as well as a humanities. And so what did you do in the lab? Were you
What did the nurse bring to the table?
It wasn't
yes.
So these are big, large population-based studies, and we had a big study in the state of Iowa, in the Philippines, and in Denmark. And to do this kind of work, it's human molecular biology. You have to recruit human participants. And part of recruiting human participants is explaining the biology and risk factors for why does my baby have cleft cleft lip and palate. Why would I want to be part of this study? So you weren't just recruiting people into a study, you were offering genetic counseling services and care coordination services and, thinking of the family more holistically.
You're kidding. You're not just an object for my research to my ends.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good for you.
So when we created database and systems, we were creating systems that always had things that would facilitate communication with the family. So as discoveries were made and as because families are lifelong interested in what happened and will this happen again and what's happening with the research and how will this research affect the next generation or my children and grandchildren. So because I'm a nurse, I can think about those
You
things.
kept the patient at the center, and from that perspective, you were the advocate for the
Exactly.
patient in this setting and what they needed.
Exactly.
And really help keep the other scientists focused on the person.
Yes.
That there's a reason we're doing this. It's
Yes.
not just to get a grant.
You're looking at the
There's
microscope,
something
but it
behind
actually
the data that we're looking at. and
Right.
That data
Right.
is indeed a
Right.
person or a family or whatever it may be.
So one of the so importantly, so this is an interdisciplinary lab. There's physicians, there's dentists, there's PhD prepared scientists that are bench molecular scientists. And for the most part, samples appear on their bench and then they start to do whatever research they're going to do, genetic research that they're going to do. So you're absolutely right that they were fascinated with the stories of who the people were that had given the samples to the lab. And more than once, I was able to take a young, genetic scientist to the floor with me as I was talking to a family about the research we were doing and about recurrence risks and the genetics. And it really then helped them understand the value of the sample they had in front of them.
the links
Yeah.
to the person.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they must liked that too.
That
And the
sounds really
patient and the
cool.
families really felt important.
Yeah.
And that what they
Feel
were doing mattered,
validated.
for sure, validated,
Well,
for
just
sure.
to humanize the science, though, is really a great opportunity for
I think-
nurses.
But
Yeah.
I really think it's so important in clinical research that people aren't an object of research and not a means to an end, but are the end of themselves.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Right.
think that your work as a nurse and bringing that is just so vitally important.
So when did you get your PhD? And talk about that a
so
little
I
bit.
finished my
How did you
PhD.
know?
Daack-Hirsch.
But how did you
How did I know?
When was it time to go, and why did you do
Yeah.
a PhD?
Yeah. So I loved the science. I thought the genetics and the nursing, the piece of the biological science and behavioral science and psychology and caring for patients, it all just blended so well. While I was working in the lab, Jeff Murray, the physician that I worked with and who was the PI, the principal investigator on that project, more than once said, "Why don't you go back to school and get your PhD?" And I thought, "No, I've got a great job. Why would I want to do that?" And then I would meet some of the professors that I had while I was in school, both undergraduate and graduate, because I did them all here at the University of Iowa. And Meridine
Moss.
Meridine
Icon.
Moss.
Talk
I
about
met
someone
her,
we
yeah.
need to have on the pod.
No,
Yeah.
Oh my God, she's a
She
hot
was-
shit. I
she
have to say
was-
that.
She's
Yeah.
the one that got me my application done. I'll have to tell you that
Oh,
story, Meridine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I see her at the bus stop.
Iconic.
Even
Living
now,
legend,
is she
actually.
around?
for
No,
the-
this was like before. This is actually how I got decided to make the decision to go back to school. And she said, "So are you still working for that physician?" Oh, that's what she thought, Yeah. And Jeff is like, he's just
Oh my
world
gosh.
famous.
Nice guy.
Nice. Yeah, I'm still working for that physician. Well, how long are you going to do other people's research and not your own?
Oh, okay. Just put it to me, Meridine, right there, right now.
Yeah.
The
So
question.
I didn't have an answer I just wanted to crawl under a rock. And,
Of course.
And said, okay, I'll have my application in the next round. and so that's what I did.
Oh, Meridine.
And I must have, I was probably in my 40s at the time, but always involved in research. And I have to say that it was quite liberating to go back to school, be able to think about research. She's right, not doing someone else's research, but ask the questions that I wanted to ask and conduct the studies that I wanted to conduct. So
That's how I felt about doing a PhD as well, is that I had been doing research and I wanted my name first.
yeah,
I mean, it's an ego thing. But I also really hated the fact that people were lost and people's stories were lost. And when I did a PhD, it was to be able to ask the questions that I wanted to ask and get trained and learn how to do that. And it was amazing.
Yeah. And there are lots of ways to be involved in research. And I was telling Tess just the other day, I was talking to a student who's getting her DNP. And in the course of getting her DNP, she's looking at a project and she keeps asking questions that are research questions, not project-like questions. And so she came to my office to talk about the PhD. And I said, there are lots of ways that you can be involved in research. It's a team science. We need clinicians that, really ground us in clinically based research questions and, can inform the way that we ask the question and which questions we're asking. And if we're doing implementation science, giving us clues as to how this might be implemented in your, in the care environment. And I said, so you can be a lively part of a team and have your DNP and still involved in research. However, if you want to drive, you're going to have to get your PhD. And she goes, no, I don't want to be a passenger. I want to drive. So I said, then you should think about getting a PhD.
So what are the barriers? What were your barriers to doing a PhD?
Oh, boy. I think most of the barriers are ones that we put up ourselves.
I agree.
Yeah. We talk ourselves, it's not the right time. I have
not
kids.
smart
I'm not
enough.
smart enough. I don't know statistics. They're
All the
almost.
things. So mine was the GRE.
Well,
That was my barrier. And I think I spent 3 years trying to relearn math
Yeah.
for the GRE. Because
Oh my gosh, Rebecca, yeah.
I graduated from high school. I think God was invented then.
Yeah.
I think God was around when I graduated from high school. So I hadn't done math. I hadn't done algebra or calculus, which you have to do for that stupid GRE thing. And I went to see Meridine, and she said, so why isn't your application in here? And I said,
God.
well, the GRE and I have to do math, and I can't do math, and I've been trying to study it, and it's not going to happen, and I'm obviously not smart enough for this, and, well, I don't know. And she said, oh, for God's sake, it's just a box to tick off. Go do it next week. And
Yeah.
she said, we just want to know that you've
Cut to
taken
the chase.
it. And so there are parts of that GRE that, the computer told me I wasn't doing well.
Right.
But then the writing part, I did really well at. But once I got over that, it was...
Do you still require the GRE,
No,
Sandy?
we don't. And
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So just last
I have
year.
a Meridine story, though.
Yeah, just
at
last
some
year
point.
we took that requirement out.
How
There-
come? Why did you and I get
you know
tortured?
what? It's I know, right? And so
Not fair.
the
Not fair. You have to go through the
They
same
always
pain
make
I went
things
through.
easier every generation.
Yeah, that's right.
When I was a
That's
kid,
right. Yeah, right.
Yeah, you should
I had
have
to walk
do it
uphill
just
twice
because
to
one of our sacred cows. It's not a very good predictor of who's going to do well in
Right.
a,
Sure,
in a
yeah.
For my master's degree in
agree.
Boston, they had, Simmons College had you could either do the GRE or you could get a B plus or an A on their gatekeeper course. So
Yeah. It's a big deterrent and if you want a diverse student body as well, because we all know that the GRE is really kind of biased towards students who are academically privileged.
Right.
So
Sure.
it's a big deterror for us in diversity, and it just isn't a very good predictor of who's going to do well.
when's the best time? I did my PhD when I was old.
Yeah.
I was the oldest person. I could have been the parent, I think, of some of my classmates.
Yeah.
But I knew that I wanted to do it. I had to do it for me because of the questions I had.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was late.
Yeah.
But what about you? And what do
Yeah.
you tell people now?
Yeah.
Well, define late for the audience. I mean,
Yeah.
what's your idea of late?
My idea of late is it depends what you want to do with your PhD. If you want to go into academia, you need to have, I think, 7 or 8 years after you complete your PhD to be in a postdoctoral fellowship and assistant professor level.
If you're at a research one institution, a tier one,
if that's what your goal is, and that takes a long time and a lot of hard work, and you have to really look at how that balances in. But there are other opportunities to use your PhD way outside of academia and in entrepreneurial work, and it really depends who you are.
Consultation.
How do you counsel students about that, Sandy?
Yeah,
what do you about
those
someone
are good
who may
questions.
be interested in?
I was in my 40s. So if I have one regret, it's that I didn't do it soon enough. But I do think that we're pressing young people to get into a doctorate, whether it's advanced degree, early, and there's a reason for that because of our faculty shortage and healthcare becoming more acute and the need for primary care providers, and so we've really pushed that people make that decision earlier. I think experience is a good thing. I think that it helps inform the kinds of questions that you're going to ask and the type of scientist that you want to be. But I think my mid-40s was probably too late for the reasons that Rebecca's talking about. You need to come sort of full circle when you get your PhD. So if you're going to go into academia or research, whether that's academic research or research at a hospital-based program or with an institute or however you're going to do that research, it takes about 5 to 8 years to really establish yourself as an investigator, doing the preliminary studies or the base studies that you need to build your program of research. And then after that, you become very more senior and independent, and you can start to mentor. And a PhD degree is a more, not an entrepreneur, but a more apprenticeship type of degree. And we do a lot of teaching one-on-one and mentoring our students one-on-one by involving them in our research. And so, to be able to do that, you have had to gotten sort of your feet under you, right? And confidence, and then to be able to not focus so much on yourself, but on the students and others. And if you're in academia, that full circle is to become a full professor, and then to really think about the academy and mentoring and teaching students, nursing students, or whatever your discipline is from the very beginning, like an undergraduate degree all the way through graduate school. So it takes a while to be able to do those things. But there are other reasons to get your PhD, and you're just absolutely right. So consultation, business, and maybe then it's not such an urgency to get your PhD in your 20s and 30s.
Right. I think you really need to have a reason why, because there are times during your doctoral work that you stop and think, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Like, really,
Right. What was my calling? Yes.
Yeah.
What's my passion?
Why am I doing this? And I always thought when I died, I wanted to have on my tombstone PhD behind my name.
Yeah.
To me, that was important. But then I remembered a friend of mine, I was a physician that I worked with in Vancouver, who said, got PhD, died anyway. So
Nice.
I think it's really important to have a good reason why you're doing it, because it's a financial investment as well. And so how
Hang
do
on,
you
we're
get funded?
We got to take a break now, Rebecca.
Oh, we do?
Yes,
Well,
we do.
Can we talk about funding and
Sure.
how
Absolutely,
you
and some of the
do
how-tos.
this?
Yeah.
So we'll take a little break right now, and we'll be back because we have Dr. Sandy Daack-Hirsch, Director of the University of Iowa College of Nursing PhD program.
Here at NCLEX Mastery, we love nurses and especially nursing students, but we need your feedback about this podcast. If you have ideas on topics or you have questions you want us to answer, shoot us a message, leave a comment, go to our Facebook page, and just tell us what you think, because we want to help you in the most specific way that you need that help. Thank you so much.
You can tape, but and if you want to tell this story, this is a Meridine Moss story. So we would walk in. She would always take the stall at the very end because it was the big handicap stall. Not that she just wanted it. She would never shut and lock the door on the stall. So you'd walk in and she'd be leaning forward, sitting there going, well, hi, Tess, like this. And it was just a crack up. And so at some point, it was just, that was her. And, she wasn't, but she was the one that scribbled that so there was these little, I can't imagine, what it was like. I caught her at the tail end of her time at the college, right? We probably overlapped for like 6 or 7 years. And there was a little, her office had a little sticker on it that said no smoking. And the legend was that she scratched off the no, yes, so she could have the smoking on there. But, there are like 3 people at the College of Nursing who are living legends at the academy, right? And Maridine's one of them. So we definitely need to interview her. But anyway. So we are back with Dr. Daack-Hirsch talking about PhD education. Specifically, when we broke, Rebecca had questions about financing and how expensive it is. And it does cost time and money and energy. So the passion that needs to be there. And so how do you counsel people and what resources are available for PhD education? How long does it take typically? And those sorts of questions that are kind of real functional to this.
So it's less expensive to get your PhD than your DNP.
Is it really?
Interesting. Yeah.
At the University of Iowa College of Nursing.
Universally.
Is it universal?
It is. Because clinical
that.
degrees are more expensive. It's more expensive to train clinicians because of the resources and technology and, simulation. Your earning potential is higher for a DNP, so we'll be honest about that. That's true, across the discipline when you do academic type of medicine or
academic medicine versus clinical
law,
medicine,
dentistry, any of those things, right? So the earning potential is higher. It's not that PhD prepared nurses make a bad salary, but that's just sort of the economics of educating people. So how long does it take? It takes about 4 to 5 years. 7 is sort of what we'd like to say is the max. That's universally for PhD, not just nursing PhDs.
Well, our history PhDs can take up to 8 to 10 years because they're learning. They have to all learn. A friend of mine is a history professor, and she had to learn Latin and French. Yeah. To do medieval history.
Sure, to do the primary sources, right?
Right, and go to primary sources, and the research was years long. So, so I think for nursing, maybe it is shorter.
So again, universally, we're trying to bring PhDs down. That's a long time to be in school for any discipline, and so
is that a deterrent, though? Frankly, 7 years is a long investment.
For some, I think it might be, but. So nursing is one of the disciplines that seems to think shorter is better. Other disciplines don't necessarily have that mentality. Now remember, a PhD. When you get a PhD in nursing, you're not only getting you're getting a PhD in your discipline of nursing, but you're not measured or compared to just other nurses with a PhD. You're measured and compared to all people who have PhDs, because a PhD is a universal terminal degree. So, for example, if I am a research scientist and I'm a nurse PhD and I'm going to the National Institute of Health to get a grant, I'm competing for that grant against other nurses who have their PhD, but other scientists who have PhDs as well. So we have to be able to measure up to all people who are doing the similar type of science. And to truncate the degree just for nurses means that we would be...
You're crippling.
Crippling when we're... Right. But we're trying to get the PhD more manageable. 10 years is a long time. So at the University of Iowa, we typically say, 7 years is the goal, is the maximum for students. Our last cohort of students, the average time to degree was 5.2 years.
Mine was 7 years.
Yeah, which is really, I think, phenomenal. And that has to do with how we're collecting data now, too, and understanding that we are setting some people up for an entire program of research, so they may be doing a sort of a homegrown...
Which is what I was doing.
Right.
It was entirely...
You ask a
nobody
novel,
had done this before.
Exactly. Versus teaching you how to... the research process and using data that's available, right. And then, you're applying your research skills.
That you were supposed to be finding your own data and not using secondary data.
Yeah,
that
so
was
that's a
already
really-
and I
yeah.
look at that as an ethical issue. And when you're shortening, if you don't know what it is to gather the data to answer your own question,
So
Yeah.
so that's a good point. And so that's the apprentice piece of the PhD, that, to get your secondary data is an excellent source of data. We have so much data that we're putting aside and that's almost unethical as well. You've collected this data, you've not used it to its maximum capability. And so you've got a young, bright
Can
PhD
you talk about
student.
an example too at some point, Sandy, where secondary data, what does that mean?
Sure. So being part of a team and learning those other aspects of collecting primary data and, an ethical review board so that you have your science reviewed by an ethics board to say, yeah, go ahead, this is a good project, you can do this, is part of that team experience, but you don't necessarily have to have your research be that experience, but you expect that a student has that experience during their PhD program.
Talk about secondary research then. What is that exactly?
Secondary so think of all of the data that's collected in a hospital. So every time a nurse goes to the
blood pressure.
Sure.
bedside
I get it.
and collects temperature, blood pressure, writes notes about how a patient responded to a certain treatment. And all of that data is housed now in an electronic medical record, and then behind that is a database. That's data that you didn't collect for a primary reason. Healthcare is a primary reason, but not a primary reason in terms of research. Now I can ask a question and go to data that's already been collected and look for the answers in that data rather than collecting my own
and then
data.
I jump in and think, is it ethical to use data on people from whom you haven't asked permission to use that part of their being? I haven't donated my blood pressure reading for your research. So why are you using it? Why are you taking it? It's not yours, it's mine.
Right. So now we're going to get into a whole. We can do that, but we're going to get
Shiny
into a whole,
objects. Shiny objects.
a whole
to the
ethical
transitioning.
discussion
No,
about
go back to
personal.
financing.
Yeah, I think I want to cover financing, and then I also want to delve into nursing as a science and as a discipline,
Yeah.
and why we need PhD, and what is nursing science research, and how is that furthered by, why do we need pointy head academics in the academy that study science of nursing, and that tension between the care delivery that we do and training that. Does that make sense? To go there just a little bit, that indulges my...
Medicine, the future of nursing.
Okay, we're back.
So how do we finance PhD
Yeah,
education? We finance PhD education. The students are research assistants and have then tuition paid for, and then have a stipend. And nursing students, PhD students write training grants with their mentors, and they can get funding from the National Institute of Health. We have generous donors who have established scholarships for nurses to be able to get their PhD.
And being a teaching assistant is really valuable.
Being a teaching institute is teaching assistant is very valuable. At the University of Iowa College of Nursing, we don't have as many teaching assistant positions as we do research, but that has to do with organizational mandates, not because we don't value teaching assistants and that experience. And then some nurses do work part-time while they're
I was going to say you can probably work a little bit part-time,
Yeah,
depending on what else is on your
I
plate.
think it depends on what your job is.
Yeah.
There was no way I could have worked part-time
Yeah,
when I was doing, did you work part-time?
I did. I worked part-time.
Oh, you're brilliant.
So-
I'm not that smart.
So I think we talked about this, how do you think that the PhD prepared person and just the science, how do you think that advances nursing as a profession to have
Yeah.
pointy heads doing nursing research? Because sometimes I think that nurses feel out of touch with what nursing research is doing and what the academics or academy does for
Especially
nursing
at
as
the
a
bedside
science
level.
For sure. For sure,
Absolutely.
especially when you have people. I mean, I can tell you many examples at the College of Nursing where, particularly Janet Speck and Meridane's nursing research was working with nursing aides in nursing homes to do better care for, and that to me is really connecting the dots. But I'd like Sandy to talk
Yeah.
and see.
And then my example was when I was a nurse practitioner, I called over to the College of Nursing to a professor who would be an expert in the problem my patient was having, and I was told that there was no connection. And I said, but that's what their research is on, and surely they're an expert in this. No, we don't come over there. And I think that that's a real problem.
Well, now it's like we've gotten ourselves out of the hospital, right? As we've moved, and said nursing education needs to be in a brick and mortar, not being, not being apprenticed in the diploma model, that we deserve to have degrees and we move towards baccalaureate degrees, but now we want to get back into the hospital, right? Or into the community and say we want to be there. So, and we haven't been there as much as we needed to.
Yeah. So to talk about PhD education, you really have to think about the historical context of the discipline and how we grew up. And so I started the podcast with talking about hospital-based nursing programs. And over time, nursing programs moved into universities and you could get your BSN or college degree. And so doing so then meant that the people who were teaching you were part of a greater college university structure. And if you were an English major or political science major, you were learning from PhD prepared professors. But nurses weren't PhD prepared. They were trained as nurses and then moved into the university settings, college settings, and started teaching. Eventually, I think the discipline then grew into being parallel to other disciplines, their professors also having PhDs. So the very first PhDs were really in education. So how do you teach nurses to be nurses? Not what's the science of our discipline. And so we've always had a lot of tension between the art and science of nursing and is nursing a science, our own identity crisis, and then others telling us that we are or are not a science-based discipline. Today, we believe that we are a science-based discipline and our sciences are biologically and behaviorally based. And a PhD really looks at what it is we do as nurses, how patients respond to the things that we do, are they evidence-based, and how do we become better practitioners and have it based in science, again, behavioral and biological sciences. Rather than having other people tell us what to do, we want to be in charge of our own discipline. And
You're darn right we do.
Right. You're darn to do that.
But
yes.
I think that there's also a way to combine the art and the science, and that's what I was trying to do.
So
in my
here-
studies.
four ways of knowing,
and
right?
that's how do we. So I'm envisioning someone else on this podcast, say a bedside RN or an LPN nurse that's listening to this. This is heady stuff we're talking about. So say if that person was here, let me just play a devil's advocate for a moment and say, what if I was to ask the question, well, what does this nursing theory have to do with me giving my medications to my patient or making sure that they're clean, like their activities,
safe or
their activities of daily living is the most important thing that is on my my priorities list for this patient today.
So
Tell
talk,
me,
yeah.
So I'm just speaking as an advocate for the bedside nurse because these are ideas that.
How do I know?
Or nurse practitioner.
Or
really.
nurse practitioner.
So you're getting to the question of how do I know what I know and why am I doing what I'm doing?
Sure.
And how do you get there?
Andrew, I think so that was what the discipline, that's what got the discipline, I think, in a little bit of a quandary when we first started off as PhD, because we were very much talking about theory, grand, big theories that we have a really hard time bringing to the bedside.
Sure, yeah.
So nurse scientists don't exist in that big grand, well, somebody's going to come into this, it's just wrong. The big grand theory is a grand idea about how and what we do. It doesn't really get at the clinical problems.
It's not granular.
It's right. So the clinical problems we address with mid-level theory and theorizing. Do I need to use heparin every time I
Flush a
flush a lock,
lock.
or I want to disconnect a patient from the IV fluids, but I want to keep that IV in because the heparin really burns and I've got to change that IV all the time. And so, that question, for example, came from bedside nurses. And it's really expensive to use heparin over and over again. Might we just flush it with saline? So how do you know that heparin's better than saline? You have to apply a research process to be able to study that, collect data, and say, this is better than what you did. You can now not do a practice that wasn't based in research or evidence-based. It's just what we always did, right? And I have now evidence that was nursing research that said, you know what, saline is just as good as heparin. And so now we've changed our practice to using saline instead of heparin.
Stellar example.
Right?
Yeah.
Bedside nurses.
And that
great
was
example.
somebody saying, why are we doing this? And listening to the patient and them saying this.
So, Sandy, can you talk about why that is a PhD question and not a DNP question?
Because, again, if you just... It has to do with the way that you, again, collect the data and establish the evidence. So, I observed it, N of 1. It worked, N of 1. Does that mean it's going to work for everybody? We don't know. So you want to do a more systematic trial where you have a variety of patients and a variety of conditions in which you're using that sort of new intervention. A lot of our interventions are based on, I did it, it worked, and so I trained somebody else, they did it, that it worked, but we can't really apply it to a population or to the general population and say, this is what we should teach in our nursing programs.
So going through a scientific process of it?
Going through a scientific process, yeah. So these are clinical and basic science researchers that train nurses how to integrate biology and behavior in order to influence our practice. So our questions should be clinically based or system-based. So clinically based in patient problems or system-based in how do nurses deliver care.
Sure. So, and one of the things that I think that we have in common across the whole scope of nursing practice, from the PhD to the DNP to the diploma level, is you touched on it earlier, was implementation. That's just one aspect of the nursing process. All right, and I have a sort of a two-part inquiry for you. I'd love to have your thoughts on this. I have the privilege of working with a wide array of trained nurses. There are some diploma level nurses that are still out there.
Of course,
I work with a lot of LPNs that are in geriatric facilities as well as RNs. I do have DNP colleagues that are opening up we're pushing the envelope of the private practice world, which I think is awesome. It's a lot different than the big academic centers like the University of Iowa. I mean, not necessarily for the best or the worst, but it's just different in a very good way. But one of the questions I have for you is how do we standardize nursing education, considering we have such a wide array of nurses and different types of education, but yet we all use this nursing process. We all come from a general knowledge background, but we alluded to earlier, was it one of the Dakota states? The standard is they have to have a 4-year degree. Where do you stand on this? I mean, it's a loaded question, but it's something that it comes up in my practice every so often.
Well, sure, because you can have multiple
way.
different letters behind your name. So when is a nurse is a nurse, right?
Yeah.
And so when can we standardize baccalaureate education as entry? Well, you're never going to let go of the ADN. I'll tell you that right now.
How come?
Of course.
How come?
Cost?
Well, I mean, we can actually go into this another time. But I would say cost, but I would also say they produce an excellent product that stays in the community where they're from, and that community colleges are invested in keeping nursing there because it helps with all the other educational components that they need, biology and sciences and all that stuff. It doesn't matter, and how does that matter? And that may be a topic for another podcast, actually.
Idea.
And it's
Because I have friends who are my age, who are diploma nurses, and why should they at age X decide to go back and return to school to do what they've been doing for the last 30 years.
Well, who's driving who's wagging the
Right.
tail? Do you know what I'm
Right,
saying?
exactly.
That's the
That
big
is
thing.
a valid question. I'm not trying to be controversial when I say
Oh,
this.
I think we should be
but I think that this is. I think
Why
this
does
is,
nursing do it? Why do we do it to ourselves?
we have done a lot to ourselves, right? And so I'm interested to hear Sandy's opinion just
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
on this
Yeah.
subject. I mean, because you've been in academia, you've been in research, you have a great science background, which I think, frankly, a lot of nurses, including myself, can identify with. And I look at the 30,000-foot view of nursing. I'm like, what the heck? Why have we done this to ourselves?
Right.
You know.
I know. You know, we're just so. I mean, the basic nursing degree or BSN is just to me one of the most awesome degrees out
For
there.
sure.
Because you do have this blend of science, sociology, humanities, and you bring it all together to be able to understand people and their illness and, life trajectories as a holistic whole package, not just the biology piece of them, not just the
Right, and it's a
Plus,
jumping point.
plus you
Behavioral
get
piece of
out.
them,
You
not
get
just
out
that-
with a RN, the most respected and
Exactly,
trusted profession.
exactly.
I mean, in a 4-year degree. Hello.
Hello,
Exactly.
and it's a jumping
And then you
point
could
to
go get anything.
wanna
You could be an
do.
attorney. You could go
Right.
to medical school.
yeah.
No, no.
So I will say that I am a big proponent of entry into practice being a BSN, a huge proponent
Okay.
of that. And
Why do you think?
because I think that experience that of a
Broad-based liberal arts
broad-based-
degree.
Yeah, liberal arts degree is an important degree because it's not just teaching you how to be a nurse, it's teaching you how to be a responsible citizen.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
yeah,
But also,
I agree.
problem solving
importantly,
and
I think
So
in the
at some
Institute
point,
of
though-
Medicine, though, wait a minute,
Yeah.
that the evidence is there that nurses with a bachelor's degree, patients who are cared for, have, for every, what was the percentage increase that guy quoted in the IOM on the future of
I
nursing?
don't remember.
That there is actual evidence that the more education a nurse has, the lower the probability of a bad outcome for their patients. So it improves the quality of care, it improves the safety of patient care. And while it's more expensive to hire bachelors of a BSN in the short term, in the long term, hospitals, organizations are actually recovering costs because of
That's an interesting statistic.
Oh, interesting.
That's really
That's
interesting.
Yeah,
fascinating.
look at the Institute
That
of
was the
Medicine
IOM.
Education, Appendix 1, Aiken. The
Paragraph
one that-
4,
yeah,
page
yeah,
325.
Of the IOM, which you can get online.
So there was a secondary inquiry I had. We had mentioned BSN, baccalaureate prepared nurses. So my question for you, Sandy, is at the bedside, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts a little bit. Is there's an exodus of nurses leaving the bedside, and I see that in my practice on a daily basis. Nurses who are they don't feel satisfied, and part of it is I don't think they feel appreciated.
I would argue it's moral distress and burnout and compassion fatigue.
Okay, that's another very
Leadership,
good opinion.
moral leadership.
Moral leadership.
Your point is well noted, and so I do think that's a great point. And so
The research shows
so
it.
spoken like a true PhD. What do you think can be done at the bedside level to prevent an exodus of nurses? Because that is where the shortage is. That's where the needs are, and we need good people there to take care of people in the community.
Well, what can be done? That's a big question.
Yeah,
it is. And this has been an issue forever. I mean, when I was getting my BSN, I remember, we took a history class on nursing at the very end of the nursing program, and they were talking about already, what are you going to do next? And it was a master's and you're a nurse practitioner, PhD. The assumption was that if you got your BSN, that you would go on, and you kind of sat in the corner if you really wanted to stay at the bedside because you didn't want people to know that you
Right.
didn't aspire to do more, right?
It's and that is almost it's disappointing.
It is
that
very
we have put
disappointing.
that pressure on ourselves
It
and
is.
on fellow nursing colleagues.
It is.
I personally don't think it's right. And in fact, if I can just add to that for a moment, like one of the things that I do when I make my rounds with all my patients, I bring the nurse in right away. I before I even see the patient, what are your concerns? And then after I see the patient, hey, these are my ideas. What do you think? And I make them a part of my care process. I make it a part of my care plan. I make sure that I have their investment too, because I care about what they know and how they're seeing the patient.
Absolutely.
Because after all, they are there
Absolutely.
at bedside
But I
far
think
more than I
that
am.
we need to also remember that, or think about the fact that as human beings, we are restless. We want more.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other people who are quite content and are staying where they need to be. But what we need to do in nursing is give people permission and reinforce
Empower.
and power that when you are at the bedside, this is an extraordinarily important job, and that you are no less for staying at the bedside than for going to
Of course
graduate
not.
school.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying.
And showing some appreciation, I
agree.
think, can add to the satisfaction
But
of
I
a
think we
bedside nurse.
also
Is that
need
the
to
Minot report? Yeah.
And I have no data to prove that, but
No.
that has indeed
But
been
I
my
know-
experience.
Let's go ahead,
No,
Sandy.
I think if everyone would do that, it would do a world of good, right? That bedside nurses felt that they were part of the entire team. And I think we make big strides in that and then backwards, big strides and then backwards, but we're caught in this sort of environment where the faculty nursing shortage is so great that people have put a lot of emphasis on making a decision earlier to get an advanced degree, whether that be a DNP or a PhD, so that you can come back and teach in all sizes of colleges and programs, schools of nursing. So that's created some tension because you want to identify who those young people are who you feel would be successful in an advanced degree and get them thinking about it earlier so that they have time to develop as an advanced practice nurse or a PhD prepared nurse. But in doing so, we've not listened necessarily to the nurses at the bedside and people saying that I want to wait or, then I think making people feel bad that they want to take some time and do this and do it for a while. There's a new report that the American Association of Colleges of Nursing has put out, and it's the Advanced Healthcare Transformation. It's called the Manette Report, and it really focuses on clinical partnerships, nurse researchers and advanced practice nurses partnering with academic health centers, but more importantly, focusing with health centers, whether they be hospitals or community-based programs, so that you're partnering with bedside, boots on the ground, first line nurses to identify clinical problems, clinically based problems. What are the problems that are important to nursing to solve? And including your practice partners, bedside nurses, in that research team, in that investigatory team, in that project that an advanced practice nurse, a DNP prepared nurse, is doing, because they're the practice that you're going to hopefully affect is that delivery of care. So not removing it like it's something that's done in an ivory tower, but it's something that's done in collaboration with people where they're practicing, regardless of where they're practicing. So we need to get better at doing that, and the Manette report really focuses on those
nice.
Oh,
partnerships.
that's great.
And
That's
it's
really
I think
important.
that I'm going to swing into the DNP for just a few minutes. That I think is one of the hardest things for students going back forward for their doctorate in nursing practice, and that's the idea of project manager instead of doer. And that's probably one of the hugest things I have to talk to the students about, all of us in the DNP program, is no. It's not your project to actually do the teaching that you identify. It's to get the resources of the people at the clinic that you're doing and implement this good idea that's evidence-based, that focuses on a population. And I think it's this mindset of nursing that we have to do all of it, and so when you move into looking at populations, it's more about almost being the nurse for the population instead. Am I making sense with this? I don't know.
Well, I think for too long separated that, research is done someplace other than where care is delivered. And it's not. We have a lot of knowledge, again, that we've, databased or cataloged or wrote about. And now it's time to implement those things. We have to see if they work. Well, they're seeing if they work in a more laboratory, sterile environment. But to see that they work in where they actually need to work, like at the point of care, is a different type of science. And that involves the people who are actually delivering the care, not a surrogate who does it just for the study, but for the people who do it on a daily basis.
To matter.
That's effectiveness. Efficacy is, does this thing work in a sterile environment? Effectiveness is, does this, whatever I want to do, work in real time, real point of care? Because there's lots of things that affect the way that you care for patients.
So many variables that you have.
So many. And even in a system there are. And so that involves the care practitioner, whether that's a bedside nurse or advanced practice nurse, in the study and the research that you're doing. And so you've got to be able to develop more dynamic teams of people who are doing research.
It really is a larger
Yes.
team.
Yes.
And that's where I see the marriage between a PhD and a DNP.
Or bedside nurse.
And a bedside nurse.
Bedside, right.
Yep.
Right. Or public health nurse or
Right. In
school
the
nurse
community.
or, right.
Yeah.
What I love is that the discussion is like you can build a team based on patient outcomes and a problem that you've identified, that you have someone you want to call and talk to about it and say, hey, is there someone who will listen to me talk about that? And then you might call like the program or somebody who's got a DNP that's in academics that or you call someone in PhD and they say, you know what, you've got questions. Why aren't you thinking about the next degree? Yeah. And then, so I love that. And we love nursing because it's what you said, Sandy, was this whole like, why wouldn't you want to get a bachelor's degree in the lived experience of people with health that's well-rounded? And if that's your bent, that's your bent.
So let me just put a plug in about, PhD prepared nurses. We're not going to have that until we start being excited about our nursing science wherever you're learning how to be a nurse, BSN, ADN, wherever it is. That's exciting things, and our students they're afraid of research or think that somebody else does research, that they're not part of this process. But again, these clinically driven questions come from the people who are practicing at the bedside or advanced practice or wherever. And to understand and embrace that as a nurse in your first degree is the first step into thinking I could do this or I want to do this. But instead of making the scary thing that it's a hard grade and I'm not going to ever use this, we should be celebrating the fact that we do these things because nurse scientists discovered that this is what we should do, or this is how we should approach this. And we should all embrace and be excited about that research that's going on, whether we do it or not. We should be living it when those findings are published. And you do that by embracing the research process, even in your undergraduate.
Because it matters to people.
It matters to
patients.
People. It does.
And to nurses who are taking care of patients, like your research, Rebecca, on moral distress. Mm-hmm. So because it matters. And it matters. That's our profession.
Yeah.
It's just so wide open, and the opportunity is just whatever you choose to make it. Yeah. Can I ask Sandy, can people contact you if they want to talk about,
of course,
when should I do a PhD? Where do I apply?
Of
which
course.
What school do I apply to?
Yes.
So how do they get hold
of it? We can link it to our podcast when it comes up.
Yeah.
And so, Daack-Hirsch,
Tessie?
will you come back again
and
be another guest?
Love it.
You're
Love
officially a friend of the pod.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy.
So Friend of Flo pod.
Thanks for having me.
It's been great.
Thank you.
All right, so we always end with our
words of wisdom.
Signature statements. Keep your eye on the patient.
Innovate, agitate, educate.
Be kind, be generous.
And keep your stick on the ice, Rebecca.
Oh, yeah, keep your stick on the ice.
I think I said my last one, right? About, embracing research in the undergraduate. Didn't I say? Wasn't there a pearl of wisdom in there? Yeah.
You're awesome.
Okay. Sounds good. See you guys.
Friends of Flo is brought to you by NCLEX Mastery. Go to the App Store right now, download NCLEX Mastery, and before you leave, if you could just share this with your nursing friends, tell them about us, leave us feedback, go to our Facebook page, tell us what you liked, tell us what you didn't love so much, be nice. But thank you so much. We really appreciate you.